Spoilers ahead for The Last Jedi if you haven't seen it already. However, it's fair to say that ever since the movie's release, Disney and Rian Johnson have been doing something called damage control. Coming out and revealing explanations to numerous things, defending certain decisions, and so on and so forth. One of these recent damage control statements comes from Rian Johnson on one of the most divisive scenes of the movie, Snoke's death. I'd also just like to add straight up from the top that I think Rian Johnson's statement is quite wrong and does show a disconnect from him and the fans, mainly where he states that Snoke was not built up in the last movie. From a storytelling perspective, he really was. He was given mystique that was unnecessary, and if Rian Johnson was being honest with himself, he'd agree. Not to mention the fact that if Snoke was indeed a nobody, then don't keep dropping things in interviews as to his immense power and such. Disney, you dropped the ball on this. Either way, when asked if Snoke was a red herring for a larger threat behind him, Rian Johnson had this to say. Well, I don't know about a red herring, but he is definitely... Snoke's place in this movie came about largely from me figuring out Kylo's arc. What Kylo's arc was going to be in this movie. In my mind, what I wanted to do with Kylo was to take him and basically knock out the kind of shaky foundation from under his feet, and build him, by the end of the movie, into someone who's standing up as a credible but complex villain. He's taken the reins, basically. He's no longer a Vader pretender. He's somebody who actually is going to be going into the next movie as someone who's taken control and taken the reins of everything. Johnson was then asked if the plan for Snoke was to be killed all along. Johnson actually admitted it was his idea. That led very quickly to that idea, because then you get to, okay, you have Kylo there at the end, what is Snoke's place in all this? And do you really want Kylo to be that, but with an Emperor figure over him? And if it is that, then suddenly your options are much more familiar going into the next movie. So it led to this notion of, okay, so that means we're going to have this dramatic moment where Snoke dies. And that means that Kylo can then ascend, actually ascend. And then that means that all bets are off for the next movie, and we can't go into it with assumptions of what's going to happen because we've taken away the familiar element, which I think is powerful. And ultimately, Snoke was not built up in the last movie. He was built up with fan theories since the last film. The truth is, Snoke has a couple of very brief scenes in the last film. And I love fan theories, by the way. I don't want to just poo-poo them. I think that's an important part of Star Wars fandom, and I think it's really fun to think about where these people come from. But the truth is, in terms of Snoke's actual place in this movie, it's much more similar to the Emperor's place in the original trilogy. It's not about where he comes from, it's about his backstory. He is the guy behind the guy, and I think he plays out his part in this movie as is appropriate. So I know people will disagree with me here, but I genuinely am not of the belief that it was all fan theories that perpetuated Snoke to greatness. From a storytelling perspective, he was given a backstory that he coerced Kylo Ren from the shadows, turning him to the dark side. He's been dropped in interviews as being more powerful than Palpatine and even Vader. When asked who he is, people from Lucasfilm have been intentionally vague. So it's fair to say that Disney and Lucasfilm have only stoked the flame of those fan theory fires, which isn't really fair to then turn around and say, well, he was no one, and if you're upset, it's all your fault because you thought he was. The amount of damage control being done for this movie as well is utterly hilarious. Rian Johnson doing his best to defend decisions and explain certain story points. Then you have Mark Hamill turning around and straight up saying he didn't like his character in the film. Whether you love it or hate it, at least we are getting some answers to this extremely divisive movie. And as always though, please do let me know your thoughts on this down below in the comment section. And if you did enjoy this video, then consider subscribing to the channel for more in the future and checking out my other content. I've been Mr. H, and until next time, I will catch you in the comment section.